Imagine a machine born in a world obsessed with speed, precision, and national pride. A machine that wasn't just built to get from point A to point B, but to stake a claim in a new frontier of competition. Picture the late 1980s, a time when motorcycle racing was shifting from raw street bikes into something more focused, more specialized, almost weaponized for a very specific set of rules. Out of that era came a shape and a sound that still trigger goosebumps today. Razor-sharp lines, a wail that echoed across grandstands, and performance numbers that seemed almost unfair compared to what the average rider could buy. It wasn't simply about winning races. It was about bending regulations to prove what engineering and determination could do when the gloves came off. This wasn't a machine made for everyone. It was a machine that changed everything for everyone who followed. And its legacy continues to ripple through every homologation special that came after. If you're ready to explore the story of how one legendary superbike redefined what dominance looked like, stick around, like this video, subscribe for more deep dives, and comment below what machine you want covered next. The Honda RC30 was never conceived as an ordinary motorcycle. It was born as a deliberate answer to the late 1980s shift in global racing rules that forced manufacturers to field production-based machines rather than full-blown prototypes. To understand why the RC30 exists at all, you have to step back into that moment when endurance racing, the Isle of Man TT, and the inaugural World Superbike Championship were colliding into a new era of competition. Honda looked at those regulations and made a bold decision. It would not simply modify a showroom bike to comply, but instead would build a street-legal race bike first and foremost, then sell just enough of them to satisfy the homologation requirements. That decision shaped everything about the RC30, from its unconventional design process to its price tag that shocked everyday riders. On the surface, the RC30 looked like another sleek sport bike of its time, with a full fairing, single-sided swing arm, and clean lines that hinted at aggression without shouting. But the details told another story. While most bikes of the era used conventional cam chains and mass-produced parts, the RC30 was fitted with gear-driven cams, lightweight titanium connecting rods, and hand-finished components that screamed of factory racing departments rather than dealership assembly lines. The choice of gear-driven cams alone was radical, not just because of the engineering complexity, but because of the cost and the unmistakable sound it produced. A high-pitched mechanical whine that became the bike's audio signature. Honda knew it wouldn't make money selling these. In fact, the RC30 was built at a loss. But profitability wasn't the goal, victory was. What's fascinating is how Honda tried to balance the dual identity of this machine. It had to meet road legal requirements, meaning headlights, mirrors, and emissions compliance. But it also had to be a platform that a racer could take straight from the crate onto a track with minimal modification. That tightrope walk resulted in quirks for real-world owners. The RC30 idled roughly at low speeds. It demanded more maintenance than the average street bike, and its riding position was unapologetically aggressive. To someone commuting in traffic, it felt punishing. To someone on a racetrack, it felt like magic. And that was precisely the point. Culturally, the RC30 also reflected Honda's corporate identity at the time, an almost obsessive drive to prove engineering superiority, not just in four wheels with its Formula One efforts, but in two wheels with motorcycles that blended racing pedigree with street accessibility. For enthusiasts who scraped together enough money to buy one, the RC30 was more than just transportation. It was a statement of being part of a very small club who understood what Honda was really selling. Dominance disguised as a product brochure. That exclusivity wasn't accidental. By pricing the RC30 far above standard sport bikes and limiting production numbers, Honda created a halo effect. Every rider who dreamed of one, even if they never owned it, carried the awareness that Honda could deliver technology so advanced it bordered on unfair. This philosophy also filtered down into Honda's broader lineup. While the RC30 sat atop the hierarchy, its innovations trickled into more affordable models, creating a perception that buying any Honda meant buying into a brand that built championship DNA into its machines. This interplay between exclusivity and accessibility made the RC30 both a symbol and a strategy, embodying the tension between what regulations forced and what Honda was determined to achieve anyway. It raises a bigger question. When you build a motorcycle that so blatantly pushes the boundaries of what a production bike is supposed to be, how do the racing authorities, the competitors, and the market react? That's where the RC30's real drama begins, and that's where the next chapter of its story unfolds. The Honda RC30 became the center of attention as soon as it hit racetracks, because the motorcycle wasn't just competitive, it was dominant. Almost immediately after its release, the RC30 proved what Honda intended. It won the very first World Superbike Championship in 1988 with Fred Merkel, cementing its reputation as a weaponized homologation machine. Competitors didn't just lose to it, they complained about it, arguing that Honda had bent the definition of production-based beyond recognition. This wasn't a lightly modified street bike. This was essentially a factory racer in showroom clothing, and that created tension across the paddock. Yet even as rivals protested, they were forced to respond in kind. The RC30 set a new standard that other manufacturers could no longer ignore. If you wanted to compete at the top, you couldn't rely on mass-market bikes anymore. You had to build your own homologation special, pouring resources into limited production models that might never turn a profit but could bring the glory of championship wins. That arms race defined superbike racing for years to come. For the aftermarket and tuning scene, the RC30 also became an object of fascination. Track-focused riders sought out racing kits, performance exhausts, and factory race parts that further unlocked its potential, while collectors hoarded spares to preserve the machine's rarity. Because the bike was so specialized, owners often faced challenges. Parts availability was thin even in the early 1990s, and many components weren't interchangeable with more common Hondas. Still, for those willing to navigate the complexity, the reward was access to a motorcycle that delivered lap times and handling characteristics unlike anything else on the road. In the US, the RC30's story had another twist. It was never intended to be a mass-market product here, but its reputation crossed the Atlantic quickly. Enthusiasts drooled over magazine reviews that compared it to full-blown race machines, and import numbers were small enough that just spotting one became an event. American riders were used to big, affordable superbikes, yet here was something far more exotic, demanding a premium that seemed almost absurd at the time. That tension between accessibility and exclusivity gave the RC30 a mythical status stateside. Meanwhile, the racing landscape itself evolved around the RC30. Regulators began adjusting rules to prevent one machine from completely running away with the championship. Trying to balance performance parity across the grid, rival manufacturers gradually caught up with their own homologation models, and suddenly the sport wasn't just about racing skill, but also about who could build the cleverest limited production machine. In that sense, the RC30 was both the trigger and the benchmark of a new era. The RC30 also stood as a cultural touchstone. Posters on garage walls, magazine centerfolds, and grainy VHS recordings of World Superbike broadcasts all fed into its legend. It became the motorcycle equivalent of a halo car, a machine you might never touch but would dream about endlessly. And that cultural weight carried into collector circles, where owning an RC30 meant not only possessing an incredible piece of engineering, but also a slice of motorsport history that had reshaped the rules. By the mid-1990s, the RC30's production run was over, and its immediate successors began to carry the flag. But its reputation never faded, because every time another homologation special rolled out, the comparison point was clear. Was it as groundbreaking, as uncompromising, as game-changing as the RC30? That's the shadow it cast, and it's why even today, decades later, the bike still dominates conversations about the greatest superbikes of all time. Which leads us to the real question. Why, out of all the machines that came and went, does the Honda RC30 still hold such enduring power? And what does its legacy mean for enthusiasts now? That's where the story turns from competition to consequence. The Honda RC30 endures as more than just a championship-winning superbike. It represents a turning point in how motorcycles were built, raced, and remembered. By the time its production ended, the RC30 had already established itself as the benchmark, and its influence continued to ripple outward. Every homologation special that followed, no matter the manufacturer, was measured against the RC30's uncompromising design and its razor-sharp execution. For enthusiasts, the machine became a template of what race bike for the road really meant. The Honda RC30's legacy is layered. On the racetrack, it forced competitors to elevate their engineering. It showed that you couldn't simply adapt a street bike and hope for wins. You had to build something purpose-made. Off the track, it reshaped the conversation around ownership. Collectors and riders alike realized that this wasn't just another sport bike. It was an artifact. Its gear-driven cams and titanium rods weren't just technical specs. They were part of a story about how far one company was willing to go to claim supremacy. For owners, that story meant pride, but it also meant responsibility. Keeping an RC30 running wasn't easy, and even in its era, parts were scarce. That scarcity only heightened its mystique. What makes the RC30's impact so fascinating is how it straddled two worlds. It was both a tool of dominance and a cultural icon. For regulators, it highlighted the tension between the spirit of production-based racing and the reality of manufacturers pushing the limits of interpretation. For rivals, it was a wake-up call to invest in their own Halo projects. And for fans, it became the ultimate dream bike, the one you aspired to see, to ride, or simply to own in a fantasy garage. Today, the Honda RC30 sits at the intersection of history and legend. Auction prices climb into the stratosphere, not only because of its rarity, but because owning one connects you to a pivotal moment in racing's evolution. It also serves as a reminder that sometimes the most important machines aren't the ones designed to sell in massive numbers, but the ones designed to prove a point. And the RC30 proved its point spectacularly. That rules could be mastered, that engineering could be elevated, and that a motorcycle could transcend its function to become a symbol. Which brings us back full circle. Why did the Honda RC30 matter so much, and why does it still? Because it redefined what superbike dominance looked like, and its influence still echoes in every homologation machine that followed. The Honda RC30 remains one of the most important superbikes ever created, not just for what it achieved on the track, but for how it redefined the relationship between racing and production motorcycles. For US enthusiasts, the significance is even sharper. Because this was never a bike meant for mass consumption here, its scarcity gave it an aura of untouchable prestige. When RC30s did arrive, they were prohibitively expensive, priced far above other sport bikes in the showroom, and that exclusivity only fueled their myth. Today, availability in the US is extremely limited, with most examples coming through gray market imports or carefully preserved collections. Auction houses frequently showcase RC30s as centerpiece items, often commanding six-figure prices for well-kept, low-mileage examples. Reliability is a double-edged sword. On one hand, the RC30 was built to an incredibly high standard, with materials and craftsmanship rarely seen in production bikes. On the other, sourcing parts is increasingly difficult, and maintaining one requires both patience and specialist knowledge. For those who manage it, ownership is less about casual riding and more about preserving history. The RC30 is also a lesson for modern buyers. If you want a homologation special today, you're stepping into a lineage that this machine created. That means limited numbers, cutting-edge engineering, and the knowledge that your bike exists because of the demands of racing, not just the demands of the street. For American collectors, the question is no longer whether the RC30 is worth owning. It's whether they'll ever get the chance. And that's what makes this motorcycle such a lasting symbol. It wasn't designed to sell in volume, it wasn't built to be convenient, and it certainly wasn't priced for the average rider. Instead, it was engineered to prove a point, that with enough focus and determination, a motorcycle could dominate at the highest level of competition and still wear a license plate. The Honda RC30 did that, and in doing so, it left a blueprint that every homologation special still follows. Decades later, its influence hasn't faded, its desirability hasn't waned, and its legend hasn't dulled. For American enthusiasts who look back at the late 1980s and wonder where the modern superbike truly began, the RC30 provides a clear answer. This wasn't just another motorcycle. It was the motorcycle that changed the game forever, and that's why its name still carries weight today.